Hello, lovelies. Welcome to Horror 421, the podcast, with your host, your friendly small-town horror author, Charles Campbell. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the frights in this week's episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Horror 421, the podcast. I'm your host, small town horror author Charles Campbell, and today I have a very special guest. I've admired his work from afar for a little while now. I kind of got wind of him through mutual friend connections on Facebook and our weekly spooky page, and I am so honored to have Bruce Haney on the show today. He is an accomplished author, and we're going to talk about some of the stuff he's done on Weekly Spooky. But anyway, welcome to the show, Bruce. I'm so happy to have you.
Well, thank you. So, since you found me through Weekly Spooky, does this make me part of the Enrique Couto connection?
Yeah, you're definitely part of the Enrique Couto connection. When I met Enrique, he said call him Henrik, but that is morphed into his real name, Enrique. That's what I called him when I first met him, was Enrique, and then he said, "No, it's Henrik." I said, "Okay."
Yeah, I think
But
he
yes,
just started going by
You're
that.
part of the. Not too long ago, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Bruce, got a lot to talk about today. One thing you sent me in the mail, and I found it very interesting. And Bruce is from Boring, Oregon. Is that correct? Sort
I
of.
work in the town. I work in the town of Boring, Oregon. I'm the town historian, but I've never actually lived there.
Okay, all right. Well, he is the town historian for Boring, Oregon. And Bruce sent me this book, and I don't read a lot of nonfiction, but this was very interesting. And it's called Oregon Moonshine: Bootleggers, Busts, and Brawls. And thank you for this copy, by the way, Bruce. It is
Welcome.
a very well written book, and he has some awesome images in here. I mean, it's a great little history lesson. So before we get started into the spooky stuff, Bruce, kind of introduce yourself, give us a little bit about your background, and tell us how you became the town historian of Boring, Oregon, and what started your fire for this book. This is a cool book.
Yeah. So, about 7, 8 years ago, I started wondering about the town I worked in, Boring, like how to get its name and about the history. It got its name by a guy named William Boring, who donated land for the first school. And when I started researching that, I decided to maybe start a Facebook group. Maybe other people will be interested in that. I thought maybe, I'll get 50 people eventually. And now, a few years later, I have about 2,000 members in that group.
Nice.
And yeah. And that led to the local Boring community planning organization asking me to do a monthly speech. And so I started doing that. And now that I had an audience, I was like, I don't want to just go, this building was built in 1905 by this guy. I wanted to find stories that were fun. And The first one I found was the story that I call the Boring boxing story, which is this guy who was in the town of Boring who was starting fights with everyone and claiming he was a prize fighter. He wasn't. His name was Free Coldwell, and I can't find any prize fighter with that name. Where can I find him? I think he was using a fake name. But the town of Boring hired a guy from Portland who was training, a guy who was training in Portland, but he was actually a Canadian fellow named Tommy Burns to have a real fight with him. And the town of Boring gave him one rule. You can beat him up as much as you want, but don't kill him. We don't want to pay to bury him. Yeah, that's my favorite Boring story. And from that, I found a new story every month. And then after a couple of years, I went, wow, I have all these cool stories that only, this group of 30 people know. I should put it together and do a book. And from there, working on that book, I found some moonshiners in Boring. And when it was time to do another book, I was like, those moonshiners were kind of fun. Why don't I just focus on all of Oregon and do a moonshining book?
Well, you have sources for all of these pictures in the book, but I find it fascinating. I love the old photographs. Um, how
Yeah.
did you pull all of those together? I mean, I write fiction, so I don't have to really go digging for a bunch of old photos and stuff like that. But this is really cool stuff, and the quality of this book, ladies and gentlemen, if you pick it up, he's it's the real deal. He's got nice, shiny, glossy pages inside. The photos all look really crisp. But tell me about these photos, man. These were awesome. How did you get those pulled together?
Yeah, the photos are kind of always the hardest part. I work on stories, I put it together, and I hope at the end I'll be able to find photos to go with them. So, I'll make a list of every like person in the story, and then I'll reach out to the local historical society and see if they have photos of those people or photos of locations I found, and I go from there. And it's kind of a long process. And
Oh,
the hardest part
I'm
with
sure it is.
that book was the hardest one to do because I really wanted moonshining, actual like moonshining stills in the book. And
Right.
the criminals didn't take photos of their moonshining operation. So, I reached out to all the major, Oregon historical groups and looked in their archives because a lot of them are online and found nothing. So I went from there to reaching out to every small one that had, just any kind of, like I could find a phone number and call, like, do you guys have anything? And I eventually found, all those great photos.
Oh yeah, well we got some still work right here too. So yeah, this is really neat, man, and it kind of opened my
Yeah.
eyes to a different part of the country. I'm in the deep South. You can't tell by the southern twang, but this is some really cool stuff. And we had bootleggers back in the day around here, and this it was really well done. And guys, uh, if you're interested in nonfiction, and I'm not a big nonfiction guy, this was really good. So you can pick this up. We'll put a link down below where you can pick up a copy. But great job on this, Bruce. I really enjoyed it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, so let's get into horror a little bit. So you got a creepy side
Yeah.
to you, man, and Bruce is part of a club that we're in as weekly spooky authors, and he's already made such an impact. So if you go to weeklyspooky.com, you can listen and subscribe. It's narrated by our good friend Enrique Couto, who does all kinds of cool stuff. So you go to weeklyspooky.com and check it out. But Bruce, tell me how you got into horror, and what made you gravitate toward horror as you're coming up, and then we'll get into these stories a little bit. And are you going to put an entire horror novel together? That'd be awesome to see. But anyway, I digress. I'll let you speak on that for a couple minutes.
All right. I found horror, I think, through my big sister. From like I was 7 years old, I looked up to her, and she was really into Nightmare on Elm Street and all the Friday the 13th movies. And I'm a listener to your podcast, so I'm going to tell you a story that's real similar to one you've told before. When I was 7 years old, we'd actually watch these movies like as a family. So as I was 7 years old, I could watch Nightmare on Elm Street, and I could watch all the violence, but then I'd have to, close my eyes when nudity came on screen. And I heard you
My
on a podcast.
stepmother.
Oh, the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, my stepmother
My
actually had a
parents
little
would never.
blackboard she put in front of the television.
Yeah. It's so funny. My family would never tell me when the nudity was gone, though. So it would be like a minute and a half later going, okay, can I see the violence now? And they'd be like, oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's
And from
hilarious.
there, I grew up in a really fun time to be a kid growing up in horror. Because, I had Tales from the Crypt, I had Erie, Indiana. There's a lot of Are You Afraid of the Dark? A lot of horror that was aimed at younger people.
Yeah.
And then
Well, I want to get into
when it get
something you're very passionate about, but keep going.
yeah, and then when it comes to books, I sound like a lot of your guests. I started with Goosebumps, and then I went to Stephen King. And those are my main two horror book writers, except Jeff Strand. I'm really into Jeff Strand, who I found on your podcast.
Yeah, Jeff Strand's pretty cool. He's pretty cool.
Yeah, I've read. You had him on like a year ago, and I've read and listened to like 16 of his books since then.
Wow, you've listened to and read a lot more than I have, and I'm a Jeff Strand fan. I really enjoyed the book Blister. I don't know if you listened to that one.
Oh yeah, that was the one because when he was on your podcast, he was talking about, they went to the place, and the next day he went, and that's when the story really started. And I was like, "Ooh, that sounds so creepy."
Yeah,
I gotta. That was the
yeah,
first one I read.
it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, there's something I know that you're very passionate about, and I don't know if I won't say that I'm super passionate about it, but I am a fan. So let's
Mhm.
talk about your involvement with Blair Witch and how you got into that, and you know, um, tell me a little bit about your story around Blair Witch and your fascination with it.
Yeah, Blair Witch Project. I didn't get to see it in theaters. I'm so bummed about that. I got to see it on probably VHS. And when it came out, they also gave you a Blockbuster if you rented a couple movies. They gave you a VHS called Sticks and Stones, which was about
Okay.
the Blair Witch Project, but it had all the fake documentary footage, like Heather's parents being interviewed and things like that. And that's what really got me. And then from there, Blair Witch 2 came out, and actually I do kind of like it. Everyone hates it, but being a super fan, I
My
love
friend
it.
Bryce, he loves it too. I'm not the biggest fan of Blair Witch 2, but he's like you in that
Mhm.
regard. He really loves it, and he loves the lore behind it. Um,
The lore is everything. And
yeah,
that movie, like, it burned so bright. It was so popular that in that 1 year after it came out, we got a sequel. We got like 5 comic books. We got 8 young adult novels and 3 video games. And then the backlash.
yeah. Well, I really I did see it in the theater. I was 30 in 1999. I think that's when it came out, 98, 99, somewhere around
Mhm.
there. And
Yeah.
yeah, I was one of those people that kind of believed it. I was young,
Hmm.
and I'm like, wow, where did this happen? Did this really happen? I'm asking those questions, and they
Yeah.
fooled a lot of people with that. They fooled a ton of people. And I was one of them. I was so gullible. I was like, wow, I can't believe this. Oh, where is this place? But yeah, and Heather Donahue's going to be at Days of the Dead next week in Atlanta, so I'm definitely going to go talk to her for a few minutes.
Cool.
Um, so I don't know if you've done the convention thing, if you've been to horror conventions, if that's something you want to
Not
do.
really. I do.
Well,
Yeah.
that's a good place to meet a lot of those folks. Heather's,
Hmm.
like I said, is going to be in Atlanta, and we had the Paranormal Activity folks there last year. I'm a fan of the
Oh, I love those
Paranormal
too.
Activity films. Yeah, yeah, yeah. My daughter got me into those. She used to drag me to the theater to watch those, and I got really pretty hyped up over those. I love the
Yeah.
first three especially. Um,
Yeah, the
but
third one is really creepy. That's the one that really scares me.
yeah,
Is the third one.
I keep
Yeah, the
going
scene where
back
he
and
goes
forth between
into
this.
the scene where
Oh,
he
go
goes
ahead.
into the room and they're just standing there in the dark.
Oh
Maybe the
yeah,
scariest thing I've seen. Yeah.
yeah. I'm with you with that. Third one really stands out. Um, I go back and forth between the second and the third film and the first one. I mean, I think I like the first three equally, and then after that, I
Mhm.
still enjoy them, but I don't enjoy them as much as the first three. But
Right.
that's me.
Yeah.
So
No. Yeah.
let's get into the horror author side of Bruce Haney. I've listened to your weekly spooky stories, and I think the last one you wrote was for Christmas and Christmas at the Psych Ward, or the last one that Henrik has narrated. So I don't know if you have any more in the pipeline for him. But let's
Yeah.
talk about
I've
Christmas and
won.
this.
Yeah. Yeah. I've
Oh, go
one
ahead.
in the pipe, and I have like 2 in second or third draft. I need to finish and submit too.
Well, he loves the holiday themed stuff, and he makes a really big deal out of you know Halloween and Christmas especially. And I've enjoyed everything I've listened to of yours on the podcast. But let's talk
Awesome.
about Caleb the Cutter a little bit and Christmas at the Psych Ward. Where did you come up with that? That was a cool short story. And for the listening audience, you can listen to this story at weeklyspooky.com. We'll try not to spoil too much of it, but I just kind of want to dig into the writer brain of Bruce and see how he came up with the idea for Christmas at the Psych Ward.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. Enrique put out the call for Christmas horror, and I thought about it for a while. I'm like, oh, what do I do? Do I do Killer Elves? Do I do Killer Santa? I thought about it for a while, and I decided to do it in a psych ward, and especially because I wanted to write about someone who deals with self-injury. The novel I actually just finished writing my first draft of 2 days ago deals with similar things.
Okay.
So I wanted to, I wanted to write about a cutter, and I wanted to make a Christmas story for Enrique so he'd have something. And that was kind of the genesis, and I just worked it from there.
Well, in your creative process, I know you've written,
Yeah.
A lot of nonfiction, and like you said, you're the
Mm-hmm.
town historian of Boring, Oregon. What are the different challenges you see between, right? I've never attempted nonfiction work. So, what are the differences and challenges you see between writing something imaginary that comes out of your brain and something you have to collect data for, like nonfiction uh,
Mm-hmm.
stuff? So, kind of compare those two for me and how you approach each style of writing.
Yeah, the process is a lot different. Writing narrative, writing fiction is, I want to say, easier, but it's getting a good word count on fiction is way easier than nonfiction. Because the way I break down the stories for the nonfiction stuff is I'll pick a topic and I'll get in the newspaper archives and find everything I can for that topic and bookmark it. And then when I find
Right.
the story I want to do, I look at that story, I write down every note about the story in a spreadsheet, and then I search the archives for that, and then add that to the spreadsheet until um, I've done everything I can possibly do on there, and then I think about putting it together. So each story takes about 3 weeks to a month and a half, just for 1,500 words.
Yeah, that would drive me insane. That would drive me 1,500
Yeah,
words is one writing session for me.
right.
That's nuts. Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, you talking about you just finished draft one of your, first fiction horror novel. Can you kinda give us a little taste of what it's about? Well, you don't have to spoil it or anything, but kinda give us a little synopsis of what we're looking forward to.
Yeah, it's actually not horror. I keep
Oh, I'm sorry.
wanting to write horror, but haven't done it yet for
Oh,
a
well, I
novel.
apologize to the audience. I didn't mean to speak incorrectly. So, but anyway, what's it about?
Yeah, it's about growing up in the late '90s. It's about the culture change with Columbine happening, pop
Yeah,
culture. It's a coming of age story about a kid dealing with having friends that have issues and how that affects him and how that changes his life and how he ends up and finds a way to have strength in the end.
right. Well, do you
Yeah,
do you have a working title, or do you have a title for the book yet? Are you
I
willing to
have a
share
working
that?
title, but I don't want to share it.
Not ready. I
It
understand. I
No,
completely understand.
because I think it's a really cool title that if I put it out there, someone's going to grab. Because I'm not sure when. Because the only goal for this novel, as my first novel, was to write it. I don't
I got
know
you.
if it's going to come out soon. It would be. I think it would be a powerful debut novel, but I'm not sure I want it to be. I think I want to write a couple more novels to perfect my craft and then go back through it again.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. All right, so I'm gonna kind of go back to Weekly Spooky. What I'm
Mm-hmm.
interested in is how did you discover Weekly Spooky? And how did
Mm-hmm.
you get connected with Enrique? I love to hear the Kuto clique and their story, their
Yeah.
origin stories of how they met Henrik. And I'm going between Henrik and Enrique, so sorry. I called him Henrik for most of the time, so that's what I'll probably keep calling him. But anyway, what's your origin story with Henrik?
um, Tubi. I was on Tubi and I seen his fun face with popcorn fodder. I'm a big Joe Bob Briggs guy too, so I love a horror host. And so I watched the first episode. He mentioned he was a director, so I looked him up, and I can't remember which was the first. I don't know if it's Babysitter Massacre or. I'm not sure which one I watched, but once I watched one, like I ran through all of them.
Yeah, Henry, his films are entertaining. I think my favorite one is Devil's Trail, just because of the chemistry between he and John, and how he
Mm-hmm.
really got under John's skin, and that wasn't an act. John was really irritated with him.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Oh man.
I think my
But
favorite of the found footage is Alone in the Ghost House.
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and that's
yeah. I
got
had
it's got
Joni.
everybody.
Yeah, it's got the whole
Yeah.
well, a lot of the kudo click in that, and it was very well
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had two of those. Well, I've had a lot of his actors on,
Mm-hmm.
but Joni and John were on a couple years ago, and
Yeah.
she's an awesome actress. I really enjoy watching her. But
Mm-hmm.
well, that's cool. It's kind of the way I found him, but I found him through the Dollar Tree.
Oh yeah.
And it wasn't even a film that he directed. It was I think it was a John Oak Dalton film, the Girl in the Crawl Space, and Henrik
Oh, those
produced
are
it.
fun too.
Yeah, yeah, and I bought it at the dollar store, popped it in the DVD player, watched it, and I said, "Oh, let me look up some of these people," and then kind of connected with Henrik and noticed he hosted a weekly spooky show, and I said, I'll submit a story, and 8 or 9 stories later, then we're pretty good friends now. I really, really think Henrik's a cool dude. So I'm glad,
I do too.
I'm glad we both got connected with him. So he loves to help authors and get their work out there.
Yeah, and that's
So,
how I found you too.
well,
Was listening to interviews of him on other people's podcasts, and I found yours and started running through it, and now I've read 3 of your books.
nice. Well, I
Yeah.
appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my books are all around the valley, and they're really, it's just stuff I know. I don't have to do a lot of research on that stuff.
Right. Well,
but
yeah, just even
it's
writing this novel, taking place in 1998, 99, it's still a lot of research. Even though I lived
yeah.
through it, I'm still like, I'm such a researcher that I have a scene where these people have like magazines on their coffee table, and I'm researching what was on the cover in November of 1999.
Oh,
Can't
nice,
stop it.
nice. Yeah, well, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. I graduated high school in 1987, so I like to set a lot of things around that time period when I can. It was such a
Mm-hmm.
fun time growing up in the 80s before the internet. Well, you got some of that. You grew up before the internet was
Yeah.
big and, took over the
Yeah.
world.
We used to go to
The
the
simple
library to get the internet.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember taking programming classes and the 24.4 and 56 whatever K modems, and the times have definitely changed
Yeah.
for sure, for sure. So,
Yeah.
what do you think what do you have coming up on the horizon? You say you have a couple in the works for Weekly Spooky, and we talked about your novel that you're working on. What do you aspire to do in the next couple of years? Do you want to, put something out in the horror realm, or you want to work on focus on more short stories for Weekly Spooky? Do you want to put a compilation together? I'm just kind of interested in what the future holds for Bruce Haney.
Yes, to all those things. I,
Nice.
I'm trying to bank a bunch of shorts for Weekly Spooky. I'm about to start another novel, and I'm also working towards the goal of doing the Rhino thing. So I want to
Yeah, in
in
November.
November I want to write
Yeah.
50,000. Yeah, write 50,000 words. Those are my big goals for this year.
Oh, those are really good goals.
Yeah.
There's another book I want to ask you about because I've actually suffered through this, and you know, I'm 54. Well, I'll be 55 next month in February. And this episode will air on February 16th. So 12 days after that, on February 28th, I will be 55. But I noticed, and I didn't look at it. I didn't have time to really look into it and see, you know, what it entailed. But you have a book out there called Brain Fog. Is that correct?
No, not me.
Oh, that's not you. Is
It's a
that
different.
another Bruce Haney?
It's another
It's on
Bruce
your
Haney.
page.
I keep on Goodreads. I
Wow.
can't get it
Yeah,
off
yeah,
there.
on Goodreads.
Yeah,
Yeah, I went to do my research on you and I was
yeah.
like, wow, he wrote a book called Brain Fog, and I actually suffered through that. And I had a medical condition that the
Oh,
doc fixed around that. But hey, other Bruce
mm,
Haney, thank you. I need to
yeah,
ask you about the book, but Goodreads, get your crap
yeah.
together.
Right. I keep wanting to buy that book and just put it on my shelf with my other books by me. Just make my catalog look bigger.
Oh man. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
you got this podcast host with egg on his face. Goodreads. Thank you. Now, there's another book that I'm sure you did, and Henrik brought it up the other day. Well, he brought it up when he narrated your story, "Eccentric Tales of Boring Oregon." Now, I don't have a
Yeah.
copy of that book, and I'm gonna go purchase a copy of that one. You sent me this one gratis, and I appreciate that. But I do like to support fellow creators, so I'm definitely going to pick that up. But tell me a little bit about Eccentric Tales of Boring Oregon. You've got my interest peaked for
Yeah.
Boring Oregon now.
Yeah. It's a book that shows that, boring is anything but boring. We have all sorts of fun stories that happened, like the boxing story or
That's in that book.
the dynamite. Yep. That's the opener. That's
Oh,
my
cool.
strongest story. Love that one. We had uh, the dynamite mystery, which this house was blown up and it was maybe the son that did it, maybe not. I got that in there. I have a story called Mashed Potatoes the Hard Way, which is about a train of potatoes getting into a wreck with another train. Yep.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna pick that up, man. That sounds
Yeah.
super interesting for sure. So
Yeah, it's a fun one.
another thing I like
It's
to
a good
ask
display
fellow
piece
authors.
too.
Oh yeah, I'll
Hmm.
bet. Yeah, I looked at the
Yeah.
cover. It looks really good. Well,
Yeah.
this cover looks
Yeah.
amazing. Um,
That the
Let me ask you
publisher,
that:
they do great work.
who put this? Yeah, who put this together for you?
Yeah, it's the History Press. And when I wrote my first book, I was hoping I wrote down like every publisher for local history, and I really wanted the History Press or Arcadia, their main company. And I wasn't going to reach out to them. I was going to reach out to these other companies first because I'm like, I don't know. But I reached out to them and they wanted it. And the reason I wanted them is they have their books in Barnes and Noble, Walgreens. You see little displays at your local grocery store. They get their books out there,
Right.
and they do quality, beautiful books.
Yeah. I mean, this is a really high quality book, guys. I mean, it's glossy. It's glossy paper. It's glossy. It's a really nice, very well done, very well formatted book, and it's the pictures, like I mentioned before, are really good, and the history here is really good. So I can't gush enough about this book. The whole thing, it's really, really, you know, high production value is what I want to say. I mean, it is legit. So you guys make sure
Yeah.
you go check this out. But
Oh, I
I
should
like.
I should mention with goals too. I actually have a third book coming out with them in a couple months.
Oh, okay. Uh,
Yeah, a book
you have a
called
third book coming
North
out.
Portland. Yeah, called North Portland Oddfellows, which is about the fraternity. The Oddfellows are kind of like the Masons or the Moose Lodge, that kind of thing. And this is a book in their Images of America series that a lot of people know about because it's like 200 photos, and then you write about each one.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's my first co-author thing because I did it with a guy named David Shear, who's also a member of the Oddfellows.
Nice. Well, listeners,
Yeah.
make sure you check that out. One thing I do like to ask fellow authors is who are some of your influence in the literary world coming up? You mentioned Stephen King earlier, but who did you gravitate toward when you picked up, your first book as a kid up until, now? I mean, who do you read? Um, who do you
Yeah.
kind of pattern yourself after?
Yeah, I don't know who I pattern myself after, but I like Goosebumps, Stephen King, now Jeff Strand. I read a lot of comedy too, like David Sedaris. I really like the humorist, John Waters, and I like the beat poets. I'll read like uh, William S. Burroughs. Junkie is one of my favorite books, and I like books about depression because I suffered from that when I was younger. So I really like Girl Interrupted, and I like The Bell
I
Jar,
got you.
those kind of books.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, you checked a lot of boxes that ring in my head, and you've heard me on podcasts say who I grew up reading and listening to and that kind of thing. As far as this is a horror podcast, so we're going to talk about horror films just a little bit.
Mm.
What are some of your favorite horror movies and genres? I know you talked a little bit about it, but so what are some of your go-tos and uh, some of the films that really get you in the horror world?
yeah. I love found footage. I loved Evil Dead when I was a kid. Well, I love it now, but I found Evil Dead when I was a kid. And whenever I was sick, like during high school, if I was out sick, this is my thing. I'd drink NyQuil, and I would watch Evil Dead 1, Evil Dead 2, and fall asleep during Army of Darkness, even though I loved it.
Yeah, it
Uh,
sounds pretty familiar. Rank the Evil Dead movies for me. Someone asked me to do that, and I'm a big Evil Dead
oh
nut too. I
yeah,
consider myself a Deadite. But
yeah.
in your ranking, can you rank the movies for me? What's your favorite to least favorite? And they're all good, but what's your ranking?
They don't make they don't make a bad Evil Dead. That's just a fact. The series, the movies, they're all good.
I've got them all.
I
I've got
it's
the Ash versus Evil Dead sitting here on DVD. But someone put me on the spot and asked me to rank them. So since you're another Evil Dead guy, I want you to rank them if you can.
Yeah, I probably go just because I love Campbell so much. It's gonna be top heavy with that. It's gonna go Evil Dead 1, Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, then Evil Dead Rise, and then the Evil Dead the remake.
I can't argue with that. My order is different, but I can't argue with that. I can't argue with that. That's so. What did you think of Rise earlier this year? I enjoyed it quite a bit,
Yeah,
and
it
I
was
like the
fun.
way they moved the setting out of the woods. What was your take on Evil Dead Rise?
I only seen it once when it came out. I just enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. The mother character was, delightfully creepy, and it had all those gross elements that made it an Evil Dead movie.
Yeah, well, she's going to be at Days of the Dead in
Yeah.
Atlanta as well, and I'm going to talk to her. I'm going to try to get some of these people on the podcast. Sometimes getting these bigger names is a little harder. We had
Hmm.
Howard Thornton on a couple years ago, and after Terrifier 2 blown up, he won't even answer my messages, David.
Right.
But I'm sure they get super busy when they get
Oh
super
yeah.
famous like that. But yeah, so
Yeah.
I was
Even
fortunate to get him on.
us as authors, we're always busy.
Oh yeah, yeah.
you know.
Sometimes a little too busy, but it's fun. Uh, I do this podcast for fun. I really don't make any money on it. I just like talking to people in horror and other authors and entertainers and musicians. That's why I had to break off the the musician podcast into a different podcast because I had people ask me, "Why do you have so many musicians on your horror podcast?" If you go back to that first season, I had a lot of musicians on the horror podcast, but
Hmm.
I don't care. I like to talk to people.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
but yeah, that's cool. So I liked your Evil Dead rankings for sure.
Yeah. The
What
other
is
big one
your?
was Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh yeah, I was actually gonna
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
follow up with something like that. How do you rank the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies? I have very strong feelings about the reimagining in 2003. Uh,
Yeah.
on the positive side,
Uh,
I loved it. A lot of people
Okay.
didn't.
Yeah, uh, yeah, I'd have to revisit it. I didn't care for
Yeah, you fall
anything
on the other side.
after
Most
the
people do.
80s.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember being 10 years old and having a sleepover, having my friends over to our house. And my plan was I rented Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1, 2, and 3. That was the kind of kid I was.
Nice. Well, you
And I
can't go
love,
wrong with that. I mean, out of the one,
yeah,
two, three,
probably the
which one
same
was your
order.
favorite? One, two, three.
It goes back and forth between 1 and 2,
Yeah, two.
because
Two
1
was
is
batshit
so,
crazy.
yeah, that's what I love about it. I'm a Rob Zombie fan, so, I like a weird movie. Even House of a
I am
Thousand
too.
Corpses, I love.
I
Yeah.
love House of the Thousand Corpses. I love 31. A lot of people didn't like 31. I love 31.
Yeah. I
Um,
like 31. That's probably my least of them, but I still do
yeah,
like
and
that
that's
movie.
most people say that. Most people say that's their
Yeah.
least, and it's not for
But I
me.
love Lords of Salem, you know.
See, now that one I like it,
Right.
but I'm not in love with it. My buddy Bryce, which you've probably seen on the podcast, um, he loves it too. And I may have to go back and revisit. I have all of Rob Zombie's movies on DVD, but I've seen that one twice, and I liked it more the second time I watched it. So I'm thinking if I watch it again, I'll probably like it more the third time I watch it. But yeah,
Yeah.
that was kind of.
It's kind of
He
like a
told me he
mood
thought it
piece.
tied into, or he had a theory it tied into Rob Zombie's Halloween too. I'm not sure how it does. I need to talk to him about that again. But yeah, I'm not sure about that. But what did you think of Rob Zombie's Halloween movies?
I like the first one, but I never did watch the second one. I think I
You're in the
started it
same.
and I fell asleep and then I never went back.
Well, and Bryce and I have this conversation. I almost say argument, but it's not an argument because it's really
No.
not worth fighting over. But I really enjoyed the first one, and I thought the kid actor, he's a grown man now, but the kid actor nailed it. He did it for me in that first movie. I thought it was excellent. Probably my favorite Halloween movie, including John Carpenter's Halloween. I like Rob Zombie's first Halloween movie. Second one, not so much. When it went off into Fantasyland and all that other shit, I was like, I don't know. But my buddy Bryce swears by it. But in the other kid, they had to replace the kid, I guess, because he got older or whatever. But that first kid in the first film, loved it.
Yeah.
I could
No,
talk.
he
I
was
could talk
good.
Rob Zombie movies for a while. So sorry.
Right. It's good. Yeah.
So you liked House of a
Halloween, I'm
Thousand
kind of,
Corpses?
yeah. Yeah, I
Now
love
go
that
ahead,
one. Love
Halloween.
Devil's Rejects. Halloween, it's always been kind of a blind spot. I've never been a big Michael Myers guy.
Yeah,
It's always
yeah.
like a shocker, just not a big Michael Myers guy. And
Well,
I was a
I'm not
Jason
the
guy.
biggest.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
me growing up
That's
too.
my guy.
I fell in love with the Friday the 13th films, and I remember I was a kid and the final chapter came out, and we had this little single theater in Aiken. It may have had two, where it had two movies that showed at one time or whatever, but it was a tiny little theater. And I called my dad on the phone, and I'm almost in tears. I'm like, because it's a rated R movie, I couldn't just go in there. And I said, "Dad, please take me to see the final chapter, please." And he didn't give a crap about Friday the 13th and any of that stuff. And I said, "Please, Dad, you got to take me. You got to take me. It's the last one. It's the final chapter. They're never going to make another one." 27 movies, 27 movies later. But
Yeah.
yeah, we got introduced to Corey Feldman in that film, so that was I really loved the '80s Friday the 13th films. Really loved them. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm one of the few people that actually like Jason X for what it is.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
that's a fun
yeah, I
movie.
mean, it is. It's campy. It's fun. It doesn't take itself
Yeah,
well. None of them take themselves seriously, but
no,
it's and the special effects in that movie are better than they should be for a film like that. If that makes sense.
right. Especially for what
So
2000, I think they made that.
yeah, and
No, it,
special effects were better than a lot of sci-fi films released in that time. So
mhm.
anyway, I digress. I could talk
And
about
I even
Jason for
love
a while too.
right. I even love Friday 13th Part 5. I love that. Even though it's not Jason, I love that movie because it has the best characters.
Yeah, I'm a fan of that film too. The only bummer for me was that it wasn't Jason, but the way they did it, I did like the characters, and um, it was a fun movie. It was. I, I I really don't dislike any of them. I even like Jason Takes Manhattan. That's probably people's least favorite. Um,
That's my least favorite, yeah.
yeah, yeah, but I liked it. I mean,
And
I
then
could
maybe the
watch it.
remake.
I have mixed emotions on the remake. I thought the first 20 minutes was excellent, and then it kind of went downhill. But the first 20 minutes was just so, it was in your face, and it was action. It was fast Jason, and um,
Yeah.
you know, I, but after that, I was like, eh. But anyway, I'm not sure what they're going to do with the franchise. I guess they're going to make another film eventually. I don't know if you've heard anything, but
Yeah, I know it's all convoluted now because who owns the rights to Jason versus who owns the rights to the title. Because I know they're doing that
right.
TV show, but it's not called Friday the 13th.
Crystal Lake, I think, or something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah. Yeah, I got the Friday 13th box set a few years back, and it didn't include all the films. And I think they have one out now that does include all the films, but it only included the first 8 films that were, uh, put out by who was the was it 20th
New
Century
Line.
Fox? I can't remember.
I think
New Line. Okay.
oh no, no, New Line bought them eventually. It
But
was
anyway,
Paramount.
whoever did the
I think
first
Paramount
8,
originally.
maybe it was yeah, it was Paramount because I
Yeah.
remember the logo now. Yep.
Yeah.
The first
Yeah.
8 got that in the box set, and then I had to buy all the others separately to get the complete collection. Now they sell it in this big fancy box set with all the films, but I'm not buying it again. I've already got it.
I remember how when they first came to DVD, how mad people were that they were changing the artwork
Yeah,
from the
yeah,
classic
I remember
VHS
that too.
covers.
Yep,
Yeah.
the classic VHS covers were awesome.
Yeah,
And that,
beautiful.
you're old enough, so you did the Blockbuster thing. When I was a
Oh
kid, we
yeah.
didn't really have Blockbusters. It's more mom and pop video stores, but same thing. You go in, pick your movies, go home, stay out until 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, watching that stuff. Awesome,
Yeah.
best time of my life.
Yeah. Because if you didn't have a bunch
Loved it.
of Blockbuster videos, you at 2 o'clock in the morning, all you could do is watch reruns of Saved by the Bell.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nah, nah, couldn't do that. But
Yeah.
yeah, geez, I remember when
Yeah.
the first time I saw Evil Dead was on VHS, and we rented from
Hmm.
a mom and pop shop. And as a kid, I was like 12 years old, maybe 11 when I saw that for the
Hmm.
first time. That scared the crap out of me, man. I know it's campy now, and it's it's not really scary if you watch it now. It's more campy and fun, but back then, woo, and I
Yeah.
like to be scared watching
I,
those movies. So
hmm Yeah. I think because I started horror so young, I barely ever get scared. So if I do, I'm like, oh, this is the best movie ever.
oh yeah,
And
yeah. A
only,
lot of
even if it's only a couple times, in the
yep.
movie.
A,
It's
lo-
like 2
a lot
scares
of
in a
horror
movie. Great.
bonus, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're just desensitized to it now. It takes a lot to
Yeah.
kind of shake me in a horror movie. Um, but I do have my favorites. Um, so before we close the podcast,
Mhm.
give me your top. Let's see. I'm gonna put you on the spot. Give me your top 3 favorite horror films, and let's break up series. Don't say Friday 13th 1, 2, 3. Let's cross the genres. cross the genres a little bit. Give me, your top 3 favorite horror films from a different genre.
Okay. Different genre, different series.
There's different series. Genre is not the right
Yeah.
word. I just don't want it to be Friday 13th Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. Let's kind
Yeah.
of get top titles.
Yeah. Man, it really pressed when you go like that. I'm like, Evil Dead 2, Texas. I think in Texas Chainsaw Massacre number 2 in there, and
Nice.
the Blair Witch Project.
Nice. I figured you'd have the
Yeah.
Blair Witch Project in there, and that's actually in
Yeah.
my top. It's probably cracked my top 5. I love the original Blair Witch Project.
Yeah.
It's a great film.
I keep recommending it to people, and they'll be like, nothing happens. But like, I know it so well. I'm watching it, and I'm like, man, it's just really cooking. We're getting through all these moments so fast. I think it's perfect.
No, it's a great movie, and
Yeah.
things do happen. And the
Yeah.
first time I saw it, when I thought it was real, I'm like, wow, these people are freaking nuts. And then they
Yeah.
when they get lost and can't find their way out, and you see real fear. I mean, all that resonated with me. And then the guy standing in the corner at the end, I had goosebumps on my arms, man. I was like, what
Yeah.
the hell's going on? It's what you can't see that scares you more. Uh,
Yeah. And
for
I love
me,
the townspeople in that movie too.
yeah,
The
the
townspeople,
little
like I love
interviews.
And Mary Brown at the trailer.
Oh,
Like I saw her. She's like a woman, with the fur and oh yeah, Mary Brown,
oh
scary.
man, she
Yeah.
creeped the shit out of me. That one, yeah, yeah. And I've watched it recently. It wasn't that long ago.
Mhm.
I watched it at least once a year. It's in the rotation that I
Yeah.
watch it every year. The Descent's another one. I watch that sometimes 2 or 3 times a year. I love that movie.
That's really spooky. That one
Yeah.
hits you a few times. Yeah.
Well, they have 2 versions out there, and I've mentioned this before. They have the US ending and the UK ending, and I prefer the UK ending. So if the movies are identical until the end, and
Yeah.
the the US version, wants you to leave kind of on a happy note. The UK ending, not so much.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've seen the UK ending to that, but it's not the American ending.
I feel like I've seen it, but just like on its own, like online, just the ending.
I
'Cause
got
I seen
you.
it
Yeah.
at theaters back when it came out.
Oh, I
The
did
American
too.
version.
And
Yeah.
yeah. But then I got the unrated UK version on DVD years ago, and I upgraded to Blu-ray recently. But yeah, when I
Nice.
watched that for the first time, I wasn't expecting that ending. I was like, oh, this hits me a little differently.
Hmm.
I like this ending better. But anyway, The Descent way up
Yeah.
there for me. It's probably my top 3. Love that movie.
Yeah.
Well,
It's a good
Bruce,
one.
man, it has been nice chatting with you. I tend
Yeah.
to ramble on these things, but what I want to do is I want to shut my mouth and be quiet for a couple minutes and let you tell our audience where they can find you, where they can purchase your books. I'll put links down below so you guys can find Bruce. But go ahead and promote yourself away.
Awesome. Thank you. You can find my books on, barnesnoble.com, amazon.com, Arcadia. You can find my social media, Bruce Haney author. Instagram is where I'm, most active, and Facebook. And find my horror stuff on Weekly Spooky. I have 3 episodes on there so far.
Yep, and I actually wrote them down. We have Christmas at the Psych Ward, The House in the Woods, and The House That Killed Me. It's Not Abandoned, and they're all really good. They're all really good. So you got a knack for horror, Bruce. I want to hear more weekly spooky stories for sure, and maybe we'll get a horror novel one day.
We will. It's gonna
All
happen.
right, awesome. All right, guys. Well, this concludes this week's episode of Horror 421, the podcast. Again, I'm Charles Campbell. You can find me on Instagram under Charles Campbell Author. You can find the Horror 421, the podcast Facebook page on Facebook. Also host a musicians only podcast called Backstage 421. You can also find it on Facebook. You can find these podcasts anywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Thank you once again, Bruce, for being on this week. I really enjoyed having you. And that'll do it for this week. You guys take care, and we'll see you next time on Horror 421, the podcast.
We hope you had a horrific time, lovelies. Thank you for tuning in to Horror 421, the podcast. Be sure to like us on YouTube and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.